This is the Sri Ramana Maharshi satsang, a time to listen, reflect, and deeply meditate. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. Welcome. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting this satsang. I'm one who loves this teaching and want to share it. Sharing it with you helps me better understand Ramana's words. So I thank you for that. And I am reviewing and commenting on the book Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi. And let's get up the words we're talking about this time. This is from Talk 81. And Dr. Bernard Bay, an American chemist who had interested himself in Vedanta for the last 20 years, now in India, came on a visit to the master. He asked, "How is abhasa to be made? I'm trying to find the light." He himself explained abhasa as concentration, that is, one-pointedness of mind. The master asked, what was his abhasa till now? The visitor said he concentrated on the nasal base, but his mind wandered. Maharshi asked him, is there a mind? Another devotee gently put in, the mind is only a collection of thoughts. And Maharshi said, to whom are the thoughts? If you try to locate the mind vanishes and the self alone remains. Being alone, there can be no one-pointedness or otherwise. The disciple said, it's so difficult to understand this. If something concrete is said, it can be readily grasped. Japa, dhyana are more concrete. And the Maharshi says, who am I is the best japa. What could be more concrete than the self? It is within each one's experience every moment. Why should he try to catch anything outside, leaving out the self? Let each one try to find out the known self instead of searching for the unknown something beyond. And the devotee said, where shall I meditate on the Atman? I mean, in which part of the body? And the Maharshi says, the self should manifest itself. That is all that is wanted. A devotee gently added, on the right side of the chest there is the heart, the seat of the Atman. Another devotee said, the illumination that is center when the self is realized. And the Maharshi says, quite so. And then finally the devotee asks how to turn the mind away from the world. And the Maharshi responds, is there a world? I mean, apart from the self. Does the world say that it exists? It is. The American chemist, long interested in Vedanta, came to visit to the master. And he asked, how is the practice of concentration to be made? I'm trying to find the light. And the master asked, what was his practice until now? The visitor said he concentrated on the base of his nose, but his mind wandered. Maharshi asked, Is there a mind? To whom are the thoughts? If you try to locate the mind vanishes and the self alone remains. Being alone, there can be no one-pointedness or otherwise. First, Ramana asked the visitor what his practice is now. Upon the discovery that the practice has an external focus that is the base of his nose in order to quiet the mind, Ramana immediately went to the core of the issue and asked, is there a mind? This is a key teaching of Ramana Maharshi in Advaita Vedanta, the idea that the individual self, the I thought, is an illusion, and that ultimately only the true self or Atman exists. If we try to locate the mind, we can't find it anywhere standing alone, and the mind disappears. Only the true self remains. The mind is a temporary and constantly changing element of the individual self, the ego I, whereas the self is eternal and unchanging. Therefore, when we try to focus on the mind, we are only focusing on an illusion. And when we let go of that illusion, we're left with the reality of the self. Nome calls this a non-objective view. In this state, there is no one-pointedness or duality. There is only the unchanging reality of the self. And the visitor then asks about practice, saying, it's so difficult to understand this. If something concrete is said, it can readily be grasped. Japa, dhyana, chanting, and meditation are more concrete. Understanding the nature of the true self and reality can indeed be difficult. It goes against our everyday experience and understanding of the world. However, it's important to remember that the ultimate reality is not something that can be grasped or understood through the mind. It is known by the knower of the mind, the conscious awareness from which the mind seems to borrow its awareness. The mind cannot know this knower like the EYE cannot see itself. Chanting, meditation, and other spiritual practices are more concrete and tangible, since these are things you can think about and do. These can help to quiet the mind and bring one closer to the realization of the true self. However, they should not be seen as a means to the end, but rather as tools to help us let go of our attachment to the mind and the individual self, the ego I. Their focus is external and objective, and so are not the real process of inquiry, which looks into the non-objective self. The most they can achieve is to quiet and calm the mind, so then maybe it can be ready to dive deep into itself. Ultimately, the nature of the true self and reality can only be achieved through direct experience and not through mental concepts or intellectual understanding. It is through self-inquiry asking such as, who am I? And to whom do the thoughts appear? That we can begin to let go of our attachments to the mind and the individual self and come to a direct attention of the self. Here begins self-abidance. Ramana then tells the questioner a practice that can bring deep understanding into the nature of the true self. Ramana says, who am I? Is the best japa, the best chant. What could be more concrete than the self? It is within each one's experience every moment. Why should he try to catch anything outside, leaving out the self? Let each one try to find out the known self instead of searching for the unknown something beyond. Ramana tells us that the self is the most concrete and tangible reality, and that it is always present in our experience. It's there right now. Do you know it? Can you not know it? We spend our lives searching for something outside of ourselves, whether it is material possessions, external validation, or spiritual enlightenment, without realizing the ultimate reality and the source of true happiness is within us all along. It's always been within us. By focusing on the true self and coming to know the self, we come to understand that the self does not need to be found or achieved, but rather it is something that is always present within our experience. Rather than searching for something outside of ourselves, we should turn our attention inward and try to know the self, the Atman, which is the unchanging reality that lies beneath the changing nature of the mind and the individual self. This is the Advaita Vedanta teaching of non-duality, that the ultimate reality is one, self-existent and unchanging, and the individual self and external world are mere appearances. Instead of seeking something external and unknown, one should realize the self, which is already known and at all times present. In the concluding part of this dialogue, the American continues to ask about some objective place where he can find the self, somewhere in his body. He asks, where shall I meditate on the Atman? I mean, in which part of the body? Ramana tries again to make his vision non-objective. He says the self should manifest itself. That's all that is wanted. Other devotees jump in trying to help the American and say, one says on the right of the chest, there's the heart, the seat of the Atman. The other says the illumination in the center where the self is realized. Though Ramana does not respond specifically to these statements, he has said clearly in other places that what he calls the heart is not anything physical. Rather, it is the spiritual center from which the self flows. So he focuses on the self, non-objective, not a body location, not a body sensation. Then the final question, how to turn the mind away from the world, to which Ramana responds, is there the world? I mean, apart from the self. Does the world say that it exists? It is you who say that there is a world. Find out the self who says it. Ramana says the world we perceive is not an objective reality, but rather known within as a projection of the mind. Ramana asks if the world exists independently from the true self, and whether the world itself can say that it exists. The answer is no. It is the observer who says that there is a world. Ramana says that the world we perceive is not an objective reality, rather a projection of the mind. Ramana encourages us to investigate the self, the witness who experiences the world. By exploring the nature of the self, you come to understand that the world is not an independent reality, but rather an expression of the mind. Ramana says that by understanding the nature of the self, we can understand the illusory nature of the world, the mind, and the individual ego I, and ultimately realize the unchanging reality of the self. And now we'll listen to my teacher, Nome, with a talk, What is it that you truly are?
The Maharshi has said that to say I have realized or I know the self and I have not realized or I don't know the self are both matters for laughter. They are absurd statements. The self is not something objective to be known or unknown. Your being cannot become an object, conceived or perceived. And if a searching inquiry be made as to who is it that knows, who is it that does not know, there is found to be no one answering to the name of I. Inquire within yourself, taking your own sense of immutable existence as the basis of the inquiry. Trace out your own existence and know what is there. It is not the body. It is not any of the thoughts constituting the mind. What is it that is assumed to be an I, but which is actually existing all the time? What is it that it is assumed to become embodied to have birth and death, but which is itself actually unborn, imperishable, and formless and unembodied. What is it that seems to be at the center of all thoughts, yet itself actually is never conceived, the unknown knower of all that is known, as the Upanishad says? What is it that you truly are? If just this much is realized, Brahman knows Brahman. Reality comprehends itself with a knowledge that is eternal, not a knowledge divided into knower, knowing, and known, but non-dual knowledge, in which being and knowledge are identical. Being is not an object, and it is not an activity. Likewise, knowledge is not something gained or lost. In the inquiry to know yourself, the dissolution of the inquirer, or the penetration into the nature of the inquirer, is what is essential. The dissolution of his individuality, what seems to mark him off as a separate being, the abandonment of such false definition, is the progress so-called. Actually, one is traveling no distance whatsoever. It is more like dreaming you were one thing and waking up to find that you were not that thing at all, that you were dreaming. If this happens, is there any transformation? Yet the old delusion is gone. Misidentification constituted the delusion. And delusion alone was the cause of any of the bondage or suffering experienced in that dream. To be free of suffering, to liberate yourself from the imagined bondage, be rid of delusion. Delusion is just confusion regarding your own nature, taking yourself to be something that you are not. Inquiry resolves the delusion and reveals a knowledge that is innate. In the earnest attempt to realize this knowledge, approached by dissolution of what you assume yourself to be. If all that is falsely supposed is abandoned, then without anything more whatsoever, the remainder is the truth itself, the Supreme Self itself, happy and at peace in its own nature always. Suppose yourself to be the ego, and the self will seem to be elusive. Inquire and find the non-existence of that I, and you yourself are what you have found. Falsely assume yourself to be the body, and realization will seem exceedingly difficult. God, or the Absolute, will seem to be something other. Abandon the misidentification with the body. Then, where are you? Where is God? If identified with the body, you will look for the self as something sensed, or as a sensing entity. Be free of such confusion. If identified with the mind, you will look for the self or realization, or reality, in the form of some mental mode or mental state. Your real nature, what is to be realized, is free of any mental mode, free of any mental state, whether it be waking, dreaming, deep dreamless sleep, or any mode occurring within those states. You are not a state of mind. The realization is likewise. You are not a condition of the body. The realization is likewise. Free of the body, free of the mind. Non-objective, unchanging. This space-like, very real remainder, which alone has been existing always, is the truth of your being. Know it experientially, firsthand for yourself. It is natural by the dissolution of the one who supposedly does not know.
And now we will take a few minutes and inquire and notice that you exist. And you know that you exist without thinking about it or feeling it. You just know. And inquire, investigate within yourself. How do you know the world? Is it with your eyes, your senses? Is it with the mind? Is it with the intellect? Is it with the knowing consciousness that you are? How do you know the world? Are you in the world? Or is the world in you? The world changes. Do you change? Things in the world come and go. Do you come and go? The world changes. What does not change within yourself? Who am I? What is the nature of my existence? What actually exists? All right. And let us close with our chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om. Peace, peace, peace. All right. Questions, comments, discussion, obeisance to the guru? You're smiling, Doug.
Well, I was smiling at what you just said. I like that question. Are you in the world, or is the world in you?
Uh-huh.
And I think
It's a good question.
it's a very good question.
Again, I just appreciate the talks and the dialogues that Ramana continues to have. And these are just, the people that came to the ashram that day. So it's not anybody special, and they are all, approaching Ramana right where they are in their life and just asking whatever they can ask. And he always has such a good answer.
Yeah, he does, because it's so easy to get hung up on questions like, where is the heart located?
Uh-huh. Right. And then where is the heart located? I had to comment about that because I've known people who have been hung up on that literally for years. And, when you start to feel there's this physical center, it's hard to let go of that into what is not some body sensation or body phenomena, into something that is deeper. Again, one other thing that I enjoy so much is that we've heard it already again and again, how Ramana starts by identifying the assumptions that the person is making about their own identity, and then immediately goes in and starts uprooting it. He doesn't waste any time. Now, also, just another comment to you. In the last few days, I really have started to become less associated and active with doing things with the Unitarian Fellowship and focusing more on this stuff. And one of the things that I saw when I started to look at it, that still my main vehicle is YouTube. And I've been focusing on what can I do to get my YouTube more active. And in the last week or so, I have been able to triple the traffic. So, more of this stuff is getting out in the world to more people. And to me, that seems really a good thing to do.
Think so, yes.
There's
I
nothing
need
like the
to-
truth.
Yes. Anyway, so we'll see you next week.
Yes,
Namaste.
Namaste.
Okay.
Namaste.
thank you so
Bye.
much. Thank you,
Yes.
Richard.
You're sure welcome.